The night Eleanor Voss walked out of Ashford Manor in the pouring rain, she made herself one promise. She would never beg. Not for shelter. Not for warmth. Not for him. She kept that promise for 4 years. He spent every one of those years wishing she hadn't. Eleanor Voss arrived at Ashford Manor on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a single leather case and a letter of recommendation written in her father's careful, hopeful handwriting. She was not a guest. She was never going to be a guest. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford, Margaret Pemberton, had hired her through a London agency to organize the estate's winter charity ball. The kind of grand, exhausting event that required someone meticulous, invisible, and most importantly, inexpensive. Eleanor was all three. She had organized 4 such events in the past 2 years, each one more polished than the last, and she had learned something valuable about houses like Ashford along the way. The grander the entrance hall, the colder the people inside it. Ashford's entrance hall was very grand indeed. She was shown to a small room on the 2nd floor, not quite the servants' quarters, not quite a guest room. Somewhere in between, which told her everything she needed to know about how the Dowager Duchess saw her. She unpacked her case neatly, hung her 2 good dresses behind the door, and set her notebooks on the writing desk. Then she went to work. For the first 10 days, she barely lifted her eyes from her lists. There were flowers to source and menus to approve and seating arrangements to negotiate with a housekeeper who believed Eleanor had no business making decisions about anything. There were letters to write, vendors to confirm, and a ballroom that needed its chandeliers cleaned before the Dowager Duchess would so much as glance at it. Eleanor did all of it without complaint, without fuss, and without once asking for anything she hadn't already been promised in her contract. She did not notice the Duke of Ashford until he noticed her first. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days after her arrival. Eleanor was standing in the library. She had slipped in quietly to consult a county map for a question about the flower supplier's route, when the door opened behind her and a man walked in as though the room belonged to him. Which she realized a moment later, it did. William Ashford was taller than she expected a duke to be, though she later understood that was a foolish thought. Dukes were simply men, after all, built in the same ordinary way as everyone else. He had dark hair that needed cutting, and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he had been traveling, and hadn't yet decided whether he was glad to be home. He was holding a book he clearly intended to return to the shelf, and he stopped when he saw her standing at the map table, one finger pressed to a road she had been tracing. He did not look annoyed. That surprised her. "I didn't know anyone was in here," he said. "I apologize, Your Grace." "I'll only be another moment." She kept her voice level. Professional. She had learned that the best way to be invisible in houses like this was to be efficient. To take up as little time and space as possible, to answer only what was asked, to give people no reason to remember you were there. He crossed the room and slid his book back onto the shelf. He did not leave. "You're the one organizing the ball," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Grace." "Mrs. Hartley says you've already changed the seating plan 3 times. "Mrs. Hartley is correct." Eleanor allowed herself a small, careful pause. "The 3rd arrangement is significantly better than the 1st. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. "I don't doubt it," he said. He left after that, and Eleanor turned back to her map and told herself firmly that the brief exchange meant nothing at all. She was wrong, of course, but she didn't know that yet. Over the following 2 weeks, she saw him often. Not because he sought her out, at least, That was what she told herself. He simply moved through the house in the way that people do when it is entirely their own, unhurried and unannounced, and Alina moved through it in the way that working guests do, purposefully and quietly. Their paths crossed in corridors, in the morning room, twice on the east terrace, when Alina went out early to check on the delivery of the outdoor lanterns. Each time he spoke to her, not at length, not in any way that could be called improper. But he asked questions, real questions, not polite noise about the ball, about her work, about where she had organized events before. He listened to her answers. He remembered what she said. A week after their first meeting, he mentioned something she had told him about a ball in Wiltshire, casually, in passing, as though he had filed it away and kept it. No one in houses like Ashford filed away things that Alina said. She began to be careful. She recognized the particular danger of feeling seen by someone who had no business seeing her. She kept her answers shorter. She found reasons to be in different rooms. She reminded herself, firmly and often, that she was here for 6 more weeks, that she had a small rented room in London waiting for her, that her father needed the money this work would bring, and that William Ashford was a duke who would be married before the year was out to someone whose name appeared in the society pages. She was sensible. She was practical. She was 23 years old, and she had never once in her life allowed herself the luxury of foolishness. And then one evening, she was in the library again. She had taken to working there after dinner because it was warm and quiet, and no one disturbed her, and William Ashford walked in and sat down in the chair across from her writing desk without being invited and said, "Tell me something true." Alina looked up from her notebook. "I beg your pardon." "Everyone in this house talks constantly," he said, "and no one says anything real. I've been home for 3 weeks. I'm already exhausted by it." He leaned back in the chair with the ease of a man who had clearly never had to wonder whether he was welcome anywhere. "You don't seem like someone who wastes words. So tell me something true." Alina looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Your chandelier in the east wing has 3 broken crystals that your housekeeper hasn't noticed. If the Dowager Duchess sees them before the ball, she will blame me. I would appreciate it if you said nothing." He stared at her. Then he laughed a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and Alina felt something shift in her chest that she immediately, firmly, pushed back down. "That's not the kind of true I meant," he said. "It's the only kind I have available at present, Your Grace." He looked at her for a long moment, still half smiling. "William," he said quietly. She said nothing. "My name," he said. "When there's no one else in the room." Alina looked back down at her notebook. She did not say his name that evening, but she thought about it on the way to her room, which was already more than she should have allowed. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford saw everything. This was something Alina should have understood sooner. Margaret Pemberton had spent 40 years managing a house, a title, and a son she considered her greatest achievement and her most demanding project, and she had not done so by missing things. She noticed the way William lingered in rooms where Alina happened to be working. She noticed the library, light burning later than it should. She noticed the particular quality of silence that fell over her son at dinner, when Alina's name came up in passing conversation. She waited. She was patient in the way that powerful women learn to be patient, not because they are unsure, but because they prefer to act at exactly the right moment. That moment came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the ball. Alina was summoned to the Dowager Duchess's private sitting room at 8:30. She went without alarm. There were still decisions to be made about the event, and the Dowager Duchess often preferred to discuss them in the evenings. She brought her notebook. She sat in the chair she was directed to. She folded her hands and waited. The Dowager Duchess did not look at her notebook. "You are a vicar's daughter," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace." "From a village in Shropshire with no family connections of any significance." "That is correct." The Dowager Duchess set down her teacup with a small, precise click. "Then I will be direct with you, Miss Voss, because I think you are an intelligent young woman, and I have no interest in wasting either of our time." She looked at Alina with eyes that were not unkind but were entirely without warmth. "My son is to be engaged to Lady Cecily Hargrove before Christmas. The arrangement has been in place for 2 years. The families are agreed. The only thing that remains is the formal announcement, which will be made at this ball." Alina said nothing. "He is fond of you," the Dowager Duchess continued. "I suspect you may be fond of him. I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, or by pretending that I don't understand why." She paused. "But fondness, Miss Voss, is not a foundation. It is a distraction. And you are a sensible girl, which means you already know this." Alina's hands were very still in her lap. "What William needs," the Dowager Duchess said, "is a wife who can stand beside him in every room in England without anyone raising an eyebrow. What he does not need," she held Alina's gaze without flinching, "is a vicar's daughter from Shropshire who organizes other people's parties for a living." The room was very quiet. "He asked me to send you away himself," the Dowager Duchess added. The words landed lightly, carefully, like something placed rather than thrown. He didn't want the conversation to happen in person. He thought it would be kinder. Alina looked at her hands. She thought about the library. She thought about "Tell me something true." She thought about the way he had said his name, quietly, as though it were something being offered. Then she thought about the word asterisk kinder, asterisk and what it meant, and what it didn't. "I see," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Your wages for the full 6 weeks will be paid regardless. I will ensure your reference is excellent." The Dowager Duchess nodded once, as though something had been agreed. "I trust you can be ready to leave in the morning." Alina stood. She smoothed her skirt. She picked up her notebook. "I'll leave tonight," she said. She packed in 20 minutes. She had arrived with one leather case, and she left with the same one, which made things simpler. She did not say goodbye to Mrs. Hartley or to any of the maids who had been cautiously kind to her. She put on her coat, picked up her case, and walked down the main staircase because there was no reason, she decided, to use the servants' entrance. Not tonight. The rain had been building all evening. By the time she stepped through the front door of Ashford Manor, it was falling in heavy, cold sheets, the kind that soaked through a coat in under a minute. The gravel drive stretched ahead of her, pale and glistening in the dark, leading down to the road that would take her to the village, and then eventually to the coaching inn, and then eventually back to London. 3 miles to the village. She had measured it on the map herself, 11 days ago, for reasons that had nothing to do with this. She did not let herself look back at the house. This was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than she had expected, which surprised her, because she had believed she was being careful. She had believed she had kept herself safely behind glass, watching something she had no right to want, and that the glass would protect her when the moment came. It turned out the glass had not been as thick as she thought. She walked. The rain soaked through her coat, and then through the dress beneath it. Her boots, which were good boots but not made for this, began to let the water in somewhere around the first mile. She did not slow down. She did not stop. She made herself count her steps for a while, and then she stopped counting and simply walked, one foot in front of the other, through the dark and the rain, away from Ashford Manor and everything in it. She did not look back. In the library on the second floor of Ashford Manor, a lamp was still burning. William Ashford stood at the window and watched the pale shape of Eleanor Voss move down the drive in the rain, until the dark swallowed her completely. He stood there for a long time after that, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, looking at the empty road. He had not known his mother was going to do it tonight. He had not known his mother was going to do it at all. Not like this, not so quickly, not with that particular cruelty disguised as efficiency. He had known about Lady Cecily. He had known, in the abstract, distant way that heirs to dukedoms know about their obligations, that his life was already arranged in ways he had not arranged himself. He had accepted this with a kind of quiet resignation that passed for maturity in houses like Ashford. But he had not known, until he stood at this window and watched Eleanor Voss walk away in the rain, how much he had been hoping for something else. He should go after her. The thought was immediate and clear and useless. He knew even as it formed that he wouldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because what would he offer her if he did? His name. His house. He didn't have the right to offer those things to someone like Eleanor, not with Cecily's name already written into agreements he hadn't signed, but hadn't refused either. And Eleanor, who had looked at him as though she was always slightly surprised to find that he was worth looking at, Eleanor, deserved better than a man who watched from windows. He stayed there until the rain eased. He stayed there until the drive was empty and dark, and there was nothing left to look at. Then he turned away from the window and walked out of the library, and did not sleep at all that night. Eleanor arrived in London on a Friday morning with wet boots, a ruined coat, and exactly 4 shillings and threepence in her purse. She had spent the night at the coaching inn in the village. A small, damp room that smelled of tallow candles and other people's misfortune, and she had lain awake in the dark staring at the ceiling and allowing herself, just that once, just for those few hours, to feel the full weight of what had happened. She was methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything. She let herself feel it. She named it clearly, without softening the edges. She had been foolish. She had allowed something to grow in a place where nothing should have been planted. And now she was leaving on a night coach in wet boots with 4 shillings and threepence, and a letter of recommendation from a woman who had just destroyed her with perfect politeness. By the time the coach reached London, she was done with it. She did not think about William Ashford again for 11 days. This was not easy. But Eleanor had learned, growing up in a cold vicarage with a gentle father and very little money, that feelings were not the enemy self-pity was. Feelings passed through you if you let them. Self-pity built rooms and moved furniture in and stayed. She found lodgings in Clerkenwell, 2 small rooms above a printer's shop, noisy and cramped and cheaper than anything else she could find at short notice. She unpacked her leather case for the second time in a month. She hung her 2 good dresses behind the door. She sat at the small table by the window and opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, in her father's careful handwriting that she had inherited along with his stubbornness. What comes next? What came next was Mrs. Dorothea Fenn. Eleanor found her through a notice in a draper's shop window. A widow of comfortable means seeking a capable young woman for light household management and occasional correspondence. The pay was modest but reliable, which was what Eleanor needed, and Mrs. Fenn turned out to be one of those rare people who said exactly what they meant and meant exactly what they said, which Eleanor found deeply restoring after Ashford. She worked for Mrs. Fen for 8 months. In that time she managed the household accounts, organized 2 small dinner parties, accompanied Mrs. Fen to various charitable committees, and in the evenings at the table in her 2 rooms above the printer's shop, she sewed. Elinor had always been good with her hands. Her mother had taught her. A quiet, precise woman who had died when Elinor was 12 and left behind very little except a small collection of French fashion plates, and a daughter who could construct a sleeve with her eyes half closed. Elinor had never thought of it as anything more than a useful skill. A thing to do with her hands in the evenings. A way to make her 2 good dresses last longer than they should. But that first winter in London, with the printer's press thumping beneath her floor and Mrs. Fen's small salary not quite reaching the end of each month, Elinor looked at her needle and thread and her mother's fashion plates and the bolt of good wool she had bought cheaply from a remnant seller in Cheapside, and she made a decision. She would not organize other people's celebrations anymore. She would build something of her own. It began very small. A dress for Mrs. Fen's niece, a pretty girl getting married on a budget, who cried when she tried it on and told everyone she knew. Then 2 dresses for neighbors of Mrs. Fen. Then an alteration for a woman in the next street, who had heard from the neighbor of the neighbor. Elinor took every commission carefully, promised nothing she couldn't deliver, and delivered more than she promised every single time. By the end of the first year, she had outgrown the 2 rooms above the printer's shop. She moved to a small ground-floor space in a better street in Marylebone. Not a fashionable address, not yet, but respectable enough that a certain kind of woman would walk through the door without feeling she was doing something improper. She hired one seamstress, a small, fierce woman named Dottie who worked faster than anyone Elinor had ever seen, and had opinions about hemlines that were usually correct. She painted the sign above the door herself, E. Voss. Dressmaker. Simple. Clean. No flourishes. Mrs. Fen came to the opening and brought 3 friends and cried a little, which embarrassed Elinor and touched her more than she showed. The second year was harder than the first. There were months when the commission slowed, and Elinor sat at her work table in the evenings doing sums that didn't quite add up, trying to decide which bill to pay first and which supplier could wait another week. There were competitors, established houses in better streets with wealthier clients, who dismissed her as a novelty, a clever little shop that would fold by summer. There were clients who were difficult, and clients who were late with payment, and one memorable client who returned a finished gown claiming the color was wrong, which it was not, and demanded Elinor redo it at no charge, which Elinor declined with such precise and quiet firmness that the woman left and then, inexplicably, sent her daughter the following month. Elinor learned things in that second year that no one teaches you directly. She learned that reputation is built in the moments when you are most tempted to cut corners. She learned that the right 3 clients were worth more than 20 unreliable ones. She learned that being underestimated was not a disadvantage if you were paying attention. She did not think about Ashford Manor. She had become, by this point, quite skilled at not thinking about it. The third year things changed. It began with the Countess of Mere, a tall, angular woman of 50 who had been dressed by the same London house for 15 years and arrived at Elinor's door one November afternoon looking, as she later told her friends, for something different. Elinor spent 2 hours with her. She asked questions and listened to the answers, and looked at the Countess with the particular attention she gave to everything. Not flattering, not deferential, simply accurate. And then she made 3 suggestions that the Countess had not expected and could not find fault with. The gown she produced 6 weeks later was the most talked about thing at the Harrington Winter Ball. By January, Alina had 2 more clients of similar standing. By March she had 4. By summer, she had hired 2 more seamstresses and moved to a larger space on the same street and repainted the sign with a steadier hand and slightly better paint. She did not celebrate any of this particularly. She noted it, filed it, and moved on to the next thing that needed doing. This was simply how she had always worked, forward and forward and forward again, with no time wasted looking back. If she sometimes stood at her workroom window in the evenings, watching the street below with the particular stillness of someone whose thoughts have gone somewhere else, Dottie noticed but never said a word. Dottie was wise in that way. By the 4th year, the 3 most fashionable duchesses in London were clients of Voss. Alina had not sought them out. She did not seek clients out. She had learned early that the moment you pursued that kind of woman, she retreated. What she had done was produce, consistently and without fanfare, work that was better than anything else available at the price, and occasionally better than things available at twice the price. And the right people had noticed in the way that the right people always eventually notice things. Her days were full and structured and purposeful. She arrived at the workroom before anyone else and left after everyone had gone. She had a better apartment now. Proper rooms, 2 floors up, light in the mornings. And she had bought herself a new coat and 2 new dresses and sent money to her father in Shropshire every month without fail. She was, by any reasonable measure, doing well. She was also, though she would not have used this word herself, lonely. Not desperately. Not in a way that stopped her working or sleeping or finding genuine satisfaction in the things she built. But there was a particular kind of quiet that settled in the evenings, in the space between finishing work and the moment sleep finally came, that she had not entirely found a way to fill. She did not examine this too closely. Examining things too closely had costs, and she had already paid more than her share. The bell above the workroom door rang on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 4 years and 5 months after Alina had walked 3 miles in the rain. Alina was at her cutting table and did not look up immediately. Dottie went to greet whoever it was. A moment later Dottie appeared in the doorway with an expression Alina had never seen on her before. A careful, deliberately neutral expression that meant something significant was happening, and Dottie had decided it was not her place to say so. "A customer, Miss Voss," she said. "Lady Ashford. Says she has an appointment." Alina's scissors stopped. She had no appointment with any Lady Ashford. She would have remembered. She remembered every appointment. She set the scissors down. She straightened her spine, the way she always did, quietly, without drama, the small private preparation for whatever came next. Then she walked out to the front room. The young woman standing there was perhaps 20, fair-haired and pretty in an unguarded way, wearing a very good coat and the slightly nervous expression of someone who is not sure they have done the right thing but has done it anyway. Alina recognized her immediately, though they had never been formally introduced. Caroline Ashford, William's younger sister. She had been 15 and away at school during the weeks Alina spent at Ashford Manor. She looked nothing like him, except around the eyes. Alina smiled a professional smile, warm and perfectly measured. "Lady Caroline," she said. "How can I help you?" Caroline Ashford blinked. "You know who I am. I organized your family's winter ball 4 years ago," Alina said pleasantly. "I have a good memory for faces. Please come and sit down. Tell me about the occasion." The occasion, it turned out, was Caroline's own engagement, a spring wedding, a large one, everything to be perfect. She wanted a gown that was modern without being startling, and her mother, Alina noted the careful way Caroline did not quite finish that sentence. Her mother had strong opinions, which Caroline was gently trying to work around. Alina asked her questions. She listened. She made notes in her notebook with the same steady hand she used for everything. She gave Caroline her full and genuine attention, because Caroline was a client and deserved it, and because focusing on the work was the only way Alina knew to keep the rest of it. The rushing, inconvenient, 4 years buried rest of it, safely behind the glass where it belonged. They were discussing fabric when Caroline went quiet for a moment. Alina continued writing. "He never married her in his heart, you know," Caroline said. Her voice was careful, gentle even, like someone setting something down rather than throwing it. Alina did not look up from her notebook. "Lady Cecily," she said, in the same tone she might have used to confirm a delivery date. Yes, a pause. He was kind to her. He was always kind. But it wasn't. Caroline stopped. "I probably shouldn't say any of this." "No," Alina agreed quietly. "Probably not." Silence. Then Alina set her pen down and looked at Caroline Ashford directly. Not unkindly, but clearly. "The ivory silk," she said, "with the cream overlay. I think it will suit you better than the white. Shall I show you a sample?" Caroline looked at her for a moment, searching, uncertain, and then nodded. Alina stood and went to the shelves and did not let her hands tremble, which took some effort, but not as much as she would have expected. She was, after all, 4 years of practice at this by now. Caroline left an hour later with a commission agreed and a follow-up appointment scheduled. Alina stood at the workroom window and watched her carriage pull away down the street. Dottie appeared silently at her elbow. "Will you be all right?" Dottie asked. "Cut the new muslin," Alina said. "We have the Harrington alteration due Thursday, and we're behind." Dottie looked at her for a moment. "Right," she said, and went to cut the muslin. Alina stayed at the window another minute. Outside, the street was ordinary, a Tuesday afternoon in March, carts and pedestrians, and a thin gray sky threatening rain. She thought about what Caroline had said. She turned it over, examined it, set it down. Then she picked up her scissors and went back to work. She had not come this far by standing at windows. Lady Cecily Ashford did not die quickly. This was the thing that Alina learned later. Not from Caroline, not from anyone who knew her directly, but from the quiet, efficient way that bad news travels through the kind of social circles Alina now moved along the edges of. A client mentioning something in passing. A supplier's wife who read the society pages religiously and considered this a public service. Small pieces, arriving separately, assembling themselves into a picture Alina had not asked to see. Cecily had been ill for nearly 2 years before anyone outside the immediate family understood how serious it was. A lung condition, they said. Delicate from childhood. William had taken her to the country. To Ashford, then to a warmer property in the south, and had, by all accounts, been quietly and thoroughly devoted in the way that a decent man is devoted to someone he has promised to care for. Alina filed this information away in the same place. She filed everything she was not going to examine too closely. She had enough to occupy her. The spring was busy. 3 weddings among her clients, 2 of them large, one of them genuinely complicated by a mother of the bride who changed her mind about color 4 times and considered this Alina's problem to solve cheerfully. Alina solved it cheerfully. She also took on 2 new clients that season, both recommended by the Countess of Mere, both exactly the kind of steady, appreciative customer that kept a business breathing through the slower months. Caroline Ashford's gown was coming along beautifully. Alina had put particular care into it. Not because of who Caroline was, she told herself, but because it was a genuinely interesting construction, the ivory silk requiring a precision of cut that she found satisfying in the way that difficult things, done well, were always satisfying. She and Caroline had met 3 times for fittings by now, and Alina had found herself, despite every reasonable intention, genuinely liking her. Caroline was warm and direct and laughed easily, and she had the quality, rare enough that Alina noticed it, of being exactly the same person in every room she entered. She did not mention her brother again after that first visit. Alina was grateful for this in a way she did not examine. The news of Lady Cecily's death reached Alina on a Wednesday morning in October, 5 years after she had left Ashford Manor. She was at her cutting table when Dottie came in with the morning paper. Dottie had taken to doing this since Alina had mentioned once, casually, that she liked to know what was happening in the world. Dottie set it on the corner of the table without comment, which was how she always left it, and went back to her work. Alina finished the seam she was working on before she reached for it. The notice was small. Formal. Lady Cecily Ashford, beloved wife of William, Duke of Ashford, passed peacefully at Ashford Manor on the 14th of October. She is mourned by her husband and her family. 2 sentences. The kind of notice that communicated everything by saying almost nothing. Alina read it twice. Then she folded the paper and set it aside and went back to her cutting. She sat with it that evening, alone in her apartment with the lamp burning low. She sat with it honestly, the way she had sat with things on that first night in the coaching inn, named clearly, without softening. She felt grief, which surprised her, because she had never met Cecily and had spent considerable energy not thinking about her. But she understood, sitting quietly in her apartment, that what she grieved was not Cecily herself, but the life Cecily had lived. The 2 years of slow illness in a house full of careful kindness and no real warmth. The particular loneliness of being adequately loved by someone whose heart was already spoken for. That was a sad way to live. Alina thought Cecily deserved better than that, and was sorry she hadn't had it. She also thought briefly and without pride about the Dowager Duchess, about the word *kinder and the letter she had never been allowed to read. And then she set that thought aside too, because the timing of what she was feeling was terrible, and she knew it, and she was not going to be the kind of woman who couldn't tell the difference between grief and opportunity. She gave it 3 months, the minimum that decency required. She did not think about William Ashford during those 3 months any more than she had been thinking about him before, which was not nothing, but was manageable. She was very good at manageable. Caroline came for her final fitting in November. The gown was finished. Alina had known. It was right the moment she held it up in the morning light. The ivory silk moving the way good silk moves, the overlay catching and releasing the light with every shift of the body, the whole thing constructed with the kind of invisible precision that looked effortless because of how much effort it had required. She was proud of it, quietly and without fuss. Caroline stood in front of the long mirror and was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Oh," very softly, and her eyes went bright. "It suits you," Alina said. Which was an understatement, but Alina did not deal in excess. They spent an hour on small adjustments. A half-inch here, the buttons reconsidered and then confirmed. And Caroline talked about the wedding, about her fiancé, about the guest list and the flowers, and whether the chapel in the village was large enough for everyone her mother intended to invite. Alina listened and measured and made notes, and was genuinely happy for her, which felt clean and uncomplicated in a way that Alina appreciated. It was only as Caroline was putting her coat back on, nearly ready to leave, that she went quiet again. Elena recognized that particular quiet by now. "I want to tell you something," Caroline said. She was not looking in the mirror anymore. She was looking at Elena directly, with the careful expression of someone who has been debating this for a while and has finally decided. "And I want you to know that I'm not saying it to upset you or to interfere with anything. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to know." Elena set down her pincushion. She waited. "Our mother told William that you left willingly," Caroline said. "That morning. After she spoke to you, a pause. She told him you'd said it yourself, that you had no interest in, that you understood the situation and had decided to go. She made it sound as though it was your choice entirely, as though you were simply being sensible and had moved on without a second thought." The workroom was very quiet. "He believed her," Caroline continued. "He had no reason not to. He thought you'd walked out because you'd made a rational decision and he wasn't worth the trouble." She looked at Elena steadily. "He thought that for 4 years, Elena. And I think it changed him, in ways that weren't good." Elena looked at the window. The November street outside was gray and cold, and entirely ordinary. "There's more," Caroline said. Her voice was gentler now. "When Cecily was dying the last weeks, when she knew, she asked to speak to William alone. I don't know everything she said. But William told me one thing afterward." She paused. "She told him to find you." Something moved through Elena's chest that she could not immediately name. "Cecily," she said. "She knew," Caroline said simply. She had known for a long time. William wasn't, he was never unkind to her. He never said or did anything improper, but she knew. She was cleverer than most people gave her credit for. Caroline's voice was soft. "She told him she'd spent 2 years being grateful to you, and that she wanted him to stop wasting time." Elena was very still. "I think," Caroline said carefully, "that he has been trying to work out how to find you. I think he's been trying for 2 months. I think he keeps not doing it because he spent 4 years believing you walked away without looking back, and he's not sure." She stopped. "I probably shouldn't say any more." "No," Elena said. Her voice was steady. "It required more effort than usual." "Probably not." Caroline picked up her gloves. She put them on slowly, giving Elena time for whatever she needed time for. At the door she stopped and looked back. "The gown is extraordinary," she said. "Thank you, Elena." Elena nodded. She waited until the bell above the door had rung, and the sound of Caroline's footsteps had faded down the street. Then she sat down on the small wooden chair by the window, the one the client sat in during fittings, and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She thought about a letter she had never been allowed to read. She thought about a man who had believed, for 4 years, that she had left willingly. She thought about a woman she had never met, lying in a room at Ashford Manor in the last weeks of her life, spending some of her remaining breath on a stranger's behalf. She wanted him to stop wasting time. Elena sat there for a long while. Outside, the November light faded slowly into early dark, and the street lamps came on one by one, and somewhere below in the building Dottie was moving around, tidying up, getting ready to leave. Finally Dottie appeared in the doorway, coat on, hat in hand. She looked at Elena sitting in the client's chair in the half-dark. She said nothing. "Good night, Dottie," Elena said. "Good night, Miss Voss," Dottie said. The door closed. Elena sat alone in the quiet workroom with the lamp burning low and the ivory silk of Caroline's finished gown catching the light gently from the dress form in the corner. And she allowed herself, for the first time in a very long time, to think about William Ashford without immediately putting the thought somewhere else. It was an uncomfortable experience. It was also, she admitted to the empty room, not entirely unwelcome. She did not sleep well that night. She was not accustomed to not sleeping well. She had trained herself out of it, years ago, on the grounds that tiredness made everything harder and she could not afford harder. But that night she lay in the dark, and the things Caroline had said moved through her in a way she could not organize or file or set neatly aside. He believed her. 4 years of believing Alina had simply walked away. 4 years of thinking she had looked at the situation, made a rational calculation, and decided he wasn't worth the trouble. She thought about what that would have done to a person. What quiet, persistent damage that kind of story would work on someone who had already been willing to watch from a window rather than go after what he wanted. And then she thought about the Dowager Duchess, and the word asterisk kinder, and the message she had delivered so smoothly, so efficiently, so utterly without conscience. And she felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both. She had spent 4 years building something real and solid and hers, and she was glad of it. Genuinely, completely glad. But she had also spent 4 years not knowing that the story she had been told was not the true one. She had spent 4 years believing William Ashford had sent his mother to do the work he didn't want to do himself. She had carried that. She had built her whole careful, forward-moving life on the foundation of that particular understanding. And it was not true. She was not sure, lying in the dark, what to do with that. 3 weeks passed. Alina worked. She finished 2 commissions, started 3 more, hired a 3rd seamstress because the spring bookings were already filling in ways that made Dottie look quietly pleased with herself. She had tea with Mrs. Fenn, who was getting older now but still sharp, and who looked at Alina over the rim of her cup, with the particular expression she used when she knew something was different and was waiting to be told. Alina did not tell her. She was waiting, she realized. Not passively. Alina did not do anything passively, but waiting in the way that a person waits when they are not sure what the next step should be, and they need to be sure before they take it. She had spent 4 years moving forward without hesitation. This felt different. This required more care. She was still deliberating, on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of November, when the bell above the workroom door rang and Dottie went out front and came back wearing the careful, neutral expression that Alina now recognized immediately. "A caller, Miss Voss," Dottie said. Alina looked up from her work. "He didn't give his name," Dottie said. "But he said to tell you," she paused, and something almost imperceptible moved across her face. "He said to tell you he's very bad at letters." The scissors stayed in Alina's hand. She thought about a library. She thought about Tell Me Something True. She thought about a window and rain and 3 miles of dark road, and a man who had stood watching until the dark took her, and had believed for 4 years that she hadn't looked back because she hadn't wanted to. She set the scissors down. She straightened her spine. She walked out to the front room. He looked different. That was Alina's first thought, and she recognized immediately that it was not a useful thought, so she set it aside and looked at him plainly, the way she looked at everything. Clearly, without embellishment. He was older, which was only reasonable since they both were. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in his bearing that was quieter than she remembered. Less the ease of a man who has never had to wonder whether he is welcome, more the careful stillness of someone who has learned that certainty is not guaranteed. He was wearing a coat that was good but not showy, and he was holding his hat in his hands, which struck her as significant in a way she couldn't immediately articulate. Dukes, in her experience, did not stand in doorways holding their hats. He looked at her, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide, which surprised her. She had expected composure. She had expected the particular armored politeness of someone who had rehearsed this. Instead, he simply looked at her the way a person looks when they have been waiting for something for a very long time and are not entirely sure, now that the moment has arrived, that they are equal to it. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace," she said. A silence that was not quite comfortable and not quite unbearable settled between them. Somewhere in the back of the workroom, a pair of scissors that had been cutting fabric had very quietly stopped cutting. Dottie, Eleanor noted, was not subtle. "I don't have an appointment," William said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "You don't." "I should have made one," he paused. "I almost did." Several times, he looked at her steadily. "I kept not doing it." "I know," Eleanor said. And then, because she believed in saying true things clearly, "Your sister told me." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more the look of a man who has just understood that the conversation he prepared for is not the conversation he is going to have. "Ah," he said. "Yes," said Eleanor. Another silence. Outside, a cart went by on the street, loud and ordinary, and then it was quiet again. "May I come in?" William asked. "Properly." Not. He glanced around the front room, at the fabric samples on the table and the order book open on the counter. "Not here if that's I only meant." "There's a sitting room at the back," Eleanor said. "It's where I meet with clients." She watched him absorb the word asterisk clients. She watched him decide not to say anything about it. She was, despite everything, a little impressed. "Thank you," he said. The sitting room at the back of the workroom was small and simply furnished. 2 good chairs, a low table, the kind of tasteful arrangement that put clients at ease without distracting them from the business at hand. Eleanor had chosen everything in it herself, which meant it was functional and uncluttered, and had exactly one personal object in it. A small framed sketch of the Shropshire countryside that her father had drawn for her when she left home, which hung on the wall beside the window and which she had looked at every day for 4 years. William sat in one of the chairs. Eleanor sat in the other. She did not offer tea, because this was not that kind of conversation, and they both knew it. He looked at the sketch on the wall for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," Eleanor said. "We were not promised to each other. You had obligations I was fully aware of. You discharged them." She kept her voice even. Not cold, she was not going for cold, simply accurate. "There is nothing to explain." "There is," he said. "Because what you were told, what my mother told you that night, was not entirely true." Eleanor looked at him. "She told you I had asked her to send you away," he said. His voice was quiet and without defense. "She told you I didn't want to say it myself. That I thought it would be kinder." He paused. "I didn't say that. I didn't know she was going to speak to you at all. I came home from Hargrove's estate that afternoon. We had been discussing the settlement terms, and I